Okay, everybody. Good evening. I'm sure we may get a few more people in, but I thought we better get going because you folks all showed up on time. Thank you for coming. I'm Greg Locke. I'm Chair of Concerned Citizens of King Township, and we have a great lineup with our honored guest speaker, Susan Plamondon, who's our Chief Administrative Officer of King Township. There was a little typo on the ad that some underpaid freelance guy didn't catch. That's me. So my apologies. I knew you were CAO, so I don't know where it came from.
The mayor is the CEO.
The mayor is the CEO. Basically, yeah.
Yeah, the mayor is.
Equivalent. Are you actually?
And he's here.
And he's here.
Interesting. And he's in the back. I also want to point out we do have some other honored guests. We are honored to have, I believe, 4 councils here tonight. We have our Mayor, Steve Pellegrini, in the back. We have Councillor Debbie Schaefer from King City, Councillor Steve Mortalini from King City, and we have Councillor Amy Eek from the Marsh, way back there. And they're going to hang around afterwards too, and talk to you all, whether they know it or not. So we're honored to have you. Thank you, because it's an important topic, and we talk a lot about it. Well, we have become very much an environmental advocacy group over time, and there's reasons for that, and we all know about that. This is a much more down-to-earth, rootsy topic because we find ourselves talking about bylaws, and we find ourselves talking kind of negatively about bylaws a lot. But on the other hand, I know that especially since 2010, several of the bylaws have been significantly reworked. And I know when we brought our deputy clerk on, he was tasked with doing a lot of that work. So with the noise bylaw, gun bylaw, tree bylaw, there's more that Susan will speak to. There has been really great progress in bringing some of these bylaws into the
Okay, that's my speech.
So we're done. Yeah, we're good. I'm just trying to get a really nice lineup. We're also not all happy with the bylaws. I mean, even me, I'm not all happy with all the bylaws. And so there's that administrative side of the bylaws that I hope you will speak to some degree. But there's the other side of the coin. It's fine to have these things, but if they're not enforced, then what really good is it? So there you go. I'm going to introduce Susan and get her up here just a minute. I just wanted to point out to you one thing, housekeeping. We do have refreshments and coffee. We're going to end about 9 o'clock, but we're not going anywhere fast, so we'll hang out and talk to you. I also wanted to point out that there was an envelope on your chair that I'm sure that you might have pretended to sit on and not seeing. And really would like to encourage you, if you've not renewed your membership, if you'd like to take out a membership, it's $20 a year. It's $30 for a family. It's $300 for a lifetime membership. We don't get money from anybody other than you. Okay? This is the thing, and although we are a nonprofit, we are a non-registered charity. So I mean, I can't give you a tax receipt so you can write it off. Okay, but we are a volunteer group. We've been around for over 40 years. I believe it's fair to say that we're the preeminent, if not predominant, citizen advocacy and environmental advocacy group, not only in King Township, but we also extend our reach beyond King, into York Region, into the Niagara Escarpment, where necessary. And you would have seen that if you attended our Cambridge Forum in 2014, where we had invited representatives from government and from organizations representing the whole region regarding the environmental plan review. So we are very much a grassroots organization, but we are certainly mature enough and are sophisticated enough that we can say we're a fairly significant entity. So for $20, I think we're a pretty good deal. So I will talk to you about this at the end.
Okay, no pressure.
And we've got in mind, and the envelope is there. And by the way, Jill's at the back, and if you actually want to make out a membership application, you can go and talk to her there. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Susan Plamondon, our CAO of King Township, and she's going to talk to you about our topic tonight.
All right. I'm pretty sure my voice is going to carry, and if you can't hear me at any point, just raise your hand and I'll try and speak up. Is that all right? Can't just double check?
And there's seats up here too.
Yeah. So am I good? Can you all hear me? All right. Perfect. So I'm actually really happy to be here to talk about, at this part, in terms of what I'm about to tell you, it's probably going to be dry as toast and boring, but it's nevertheless an important foundation piece for the discussion about our bylaws. And when Jill first approached me about coming to speak on the subject tonight, and then when Greg followed up, I wasn't entirely sure which kind of bylaws you really wanted to talk about. So we're going to talk about lots of them. And I am really pleased to be here because I think one of the most important things that we can do as a staff in the township is help to make sure that our community has the knowledge, has the facts, and is educated about what we can do and what we can't do and some of the challenges that we face as we try to do things. And I think it's really important, as Greg set me up there, for you all to remember we can't please all of the people all of the time. When it comes to bylaws or any kind of a regulatory framework, there are people who like them and people who don't. There are people who say, I want these rules, but I don't want them to apply to me. Right? And the business interests may compete with the residential interests. So there's always going to be a healthy tension. So what we have to hope we can do, and what council always tries to do, I think, anyway, at least in the time that I've been working for the municipality, is to find that balance. So just with that to start out, I am, in terms of CCKT, you are a very, very engaged group of people, and I know that you make a really significant contribution to the quality of life in this community, and I know that's what motivates you to be here this evening, and I know that's going to motivate and be what's underlying any kind of questions that you might want to ask me afterwards. And from discussing this by email with Greg, the question and answer period is probably where you're going to get the most out of this, to be really honest with you. So I've been asked to speak about the township's bylaws and what's happening with them. So that's what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and give you a little bit of background on what our jurisdiction or our authority is to pass them in the first place, when, why, and how we go about developing them, and how and when we go about renewing them, the tools that we have to enforce them, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of statistical information. So if that's all right, that's what I'm planning to do. And I just mentioned the Q&A. So you probably already know, because most of you are very engaged in the community, that we get our authority to pass the bylaws from provincial legislation. And the primary sources of that are the Municipal Act, the Planning Act, and the Ontario Building Code Act. There are other legislative authorities that we have, but generally speaking, most of the bylaws that deal with our day-to-day life in the community come from those pieces of legislation. Now, the Municipal Act gives us our authority to pass what we call regulatory bylaws, focused on how I characterize as two key areas. One is in the area of public health and safety, and the other is on quality of life, which includes things that are a nuisance and maybe some aesthetic issues. The public health and safety, parking and traffic bylaws, for example, are public health and safety bylaws, and they're authorized by the Municipal Act. The Planning Act is the legislation that allows us to enact zoning bylaws. And you know, they regulate how we can use the land in the community. It also directs us to pass bylaws to adopt our official plan, which is the land use planning policy document, as well as site plan and subdivision agreements that actually govern how development actually proceeds. So when I mentioned earlier about, I wasn't sure what kind of bylaws you were talking about, I leapt to the conclusion that you might be interested in things like the bylaw that adopts the official plan and the zoning bylaw, because the zoning bylaw, in addition to some of the other bylaws that we pass, are things that affect your day-to-day life. The Building Code Act not only regulates the construction of buildings and other structures, but it also gives us our authority to enact what we call property standards bylaws. And some of you might be interested to learn, just in terms of the Building Code Act itself, that the chief building official derives his duties, and I say he because it's a male person in King Township, his duties and responsibilities and his authority under the authority of the Building Code Act. And actually when it comes to the actual building code regulation, he's not accountable to council or even to me. He's accountable as the CAO. He's accountable to the legislation when it comes to the provisions of the Ontario Building Code. And I don't know that very many people actually understand that. He has independence, and his obligation is to the Crown, and that legislation and that regulation, not to the council or even to the CAO. Administratively, certainly, but not in terms of the application of the Ontario Building Code regulation. That's not the same as the property standards piece. That's a different part of the Building Code Act. But when it comes to the Building Code, I thought you might be interested to know that, because I'm not sure very many people realize that. And I'll talk a little bit more later about the Property Standards Act. So you know, when, why, and how? When, why, and how do we actually bother to pass bylaws? Well, generally speaking, if we start with the Planning Act, it's because the Planning Act actually tells municipalities that they need to have an official plan and they need to have a zoning bylaw. So we don't have a choice. We have to have those bylaws in place. And in terms of the official plan, which as I mentioned is a policy document, up until December of this last year, councils were, or municipalities were required to actually review them every 5 years. With the amendments to the Planning Act that got approved in December, 10 years, every 10 years. So that's a base document, and the reason I really mention the official plan, because it's a different kind of bylaw, is because the zoning bylaw that then gets passed has to conform with the official plan. It also has to conform with provincial policy, with other provincial legislation, and with the Region of York's official plan. So where you might think that there's a lot of opportunity to narrow things down, council's bylaws or council's official plan has to conform with provincial policy, as I said, and the Region of York's official plan. Now, that also includes things like the Oak Ridge Marine legislation and the Greenbelt plan, but it also includes things like intensification. So there are both things that are our official plan, and therefore our zoning bylaw need to comply with. And I don't think I need to tell you that reviewing official plans and zoning bylaws are very time-consuming, very expensive processes that do involve a lot of public consultation. It's required by the legislation. Not only that, it's a really good thing to do, the consultation piece. So to let you know what we're doing, what we're up to, what's happening with them, we are right now in the middle of our official plan review. And we expect to have the draft document out later this year. There are a number of discussion papers that are online. They're all available for you to review. That actually has a separate web address, but you can get to it from the township's page. And I invite you all to read the discussion papers because they are setting the table for what we might expect to see come in the official plan policy document, which will then be reflected in the zoning bylaw that's required to implement it. Now, the zoning bylaw is is a sore spot. I'm going to be really frank with you. It has not been really looked at for way too many years. And so, but that's another big project. And going on at the same time as the official plan, it taxes our resources. So we decided that we should chunk it up a bit and do it in segments. And so council approved a plan a little over a year ago that would see us start with the village of Nobleton, and that might then serve as a template. Get some of the definitions nailed down, some of the framework for the document in place, recognizing that Nobleton is a different community, then King City is a different community, then Schaumburg is a different community. So at the end of the process, we will have 3 different zoning bylaws, but the framework for it, the definitions, and a lot of that will be the same because it'll be much easier to administer to the extent that we can have some commonality in it. So that zoning bylaw for Nobleton is well underway, and it will be, we've done a lot of work with it. There's been some public consultation and a charrette, and because we think it's moving along really well, and council made it very clear to staff, and I mean very clear to staff, that we want to get the King City and Schaumburg bylaws done as soon as possible. The update of those bylaws is on the work plan for 216, and there's going to be a report going to council next meeting, so on the 21st, from the planning department that's going to set out the work plan and the timelines associated with the official plan, the Nobleton zoning bylaw, the King City zoning bylaw, and the Schaumburg zoning bylaw. So I encourage you to take a look at that report because it'll be on the agenda for the 21st. And our goal is to get as much of this done as we can to the point of formal adoption by council in the next 18 months by the time we get finished with King City and Schaumburg. They are big, big, big exercises, and they require a lot of thought and a lot of attention to detail to make sure that we don't inadvertently do things that we don't want to do, and that we make sure that we support the kinds of activities we do want to see. Because at the same time, our zoning bylaws, we need a viable and effective business community. We need a viable and effective and healthy residential community. So we have to address all of those things through those processes. So even if you don't live in Nobleton, take a good look at the Nobleton bylaw when it lands, because it will be the same framework we're going to try and use for King City and Schaumburg. And I'm happy to say, even through the Nobleton public consultations that most of you had in Nobleton, lots of folks from other communities have come. So we've had the benefit of hearing from the entire community. The rural area will follow, but it's much more stable than the villages are, because frankly, with the marine legislation and the green belt, there's not a whole lot that can be done out there anyway right now in terms of real change. So the priorities have been on the villages, and I hope that you agree that that's a good idea. Now, when we talk about the building, am I boring you yet?
No.
Is this okay? Am I kind of hitting what you want to hear?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned earlier, so I'm going to switch gears now from the planning side to the day-to-day more regulatory bylaws that deal with things like public health and safety and how our community looks and feels and how we can be better neighbors to each other. I mean, frankly, I wish we didn't have to have bylaws to make sure we were all good neighbors, but the truth is we do. So I mentioned the Building Code Act allows us to pass what's called a property standards bylaw, and I think a lot of people have expectations of the property standards bylaw that are a little unrealistic in the context of what it is that it's supposed to be doing. So let me just, if I can, I'll just take a moment to go through that. My personal, now because it's in the bill, it used to be, the authority used to be in the Planning Act, believe it or not, to pass a property standards bylaw, which was very interesting. But a number of years ago, they moved it into the Building Code Act. And the Building Code Act is a public health and safety document. The only reason we have a building code is to make sure that buildings go up and that they're safe for people to be in. And it sets a standard, a minimum standard, not a maximum standard, but a minimum standard. So in my own opinion, and this is just my opinion, I believe the intended focus of a property standards bylaw is for those properties where the building or the property is in a very serious state of disrepair, such that it's not just an eyesore, but it actually poses a public health and safety risk. And the reason that I say that, but that's what I think the property standards bylaw is for, is because within that legislation, it has its own rules for how you go about actually enforcing a property standards bylaw. We are required to do an inspection. We're required to issue notices. The property owner has time to respond. And if the property owner doesn't respond, there's another step that we have to take. And eventually we have to issue an order. And that order has to provide very detailed direction on what it is that we expect them to do. And when we issue that order, the property owner has a right to appeal that order. And that process takes a long time. And then at the end of all of that, assuming that the property standards order was clear enough and that it was an actual contravention of the property standards bylaw and a court agrees that it's serious enough, then the municipality has the authority to go onto the property, make the necessary repair or whatever needs to be done, and add the cost of taxes and collect the money back that way. I can tell you from personal experience in one of my former lives, this process, if the property owner takes it to the limit, can take years. And in the meantime, it looks like nothing's getting done. And sometimes property owners use the time in order to get the resources, because sometimes the property owners don't have the financial resources to do what needs to be done. So they use the process to take the time. So that's its own little thing. And it's very difficult to enforce effectively in terms of what I think the community expects it to be able to do. I wouldn't be surprised, let's put it this way, if you told me that you thought the purpose of that bylaw was to make sure people kept their yards tidy. Really, I don't think it is. I think it's more focused, the point of the property standards with all the procedure that goes with it, is it's more directed to what I call the public health and safety issues, not the aesthetic issues. And I will tell you a little bit later about something that I hope we're going to do that will help with what I'll call the day-to-day nuisance aesthetic issues. And council doesn't even know this yet because we're still thinking about how best to do it, so we can give them an idea. But I'm going to plant the idea with you tonight, and I hope that the mayor and the members of council who are here tonight aren't cross with me for doing that.
See you later. You just woke me up.
Okay, I am trying to make this a little bit light because this topic can be dry as toast. I know that.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
We're taking notes, right?
It's all written. Most of what I'm saying, I'm going off my script a little bit to try and, because when I reread this, it's really dry. Okay, so other municipal act bylaws that have a lot to do with how our community looks and feels and deals with public health and safety type issues, we got a bunch of them. And some of them have been on the books for a long time. And I'm not going to give you the complete list, but I am going to sort of give you an idea. One of them is a sign bylaw, a fence bylaw, animal control, parking, site alteration. Sometimes that's referred to as fill and grading. So if I use site alteration, I mean fill and grading, and if I say fill and grading, it means site alteration. They're interchangeable. Snow removal, kennels, doggy daycare, dog licensing. Those are the kinds of things that we have the council of the day over the years has passed a number of regulatory bylaws. And oh, by the way, the ones I just mentioned and a few more, again, are accessible. You can read the whole thing on the township's website, and it's really quite easy to get to them. If you just at the very bottom on the home page, there's a tab that says Bylaw Enforcement, and all you have to do is click on that, and it'll take you to that section, and then within it, another click will take you to the bylaw that you might be interested in. So it's not hard. The bylaws are there in their entirety. There are some helpful hints on who to call, what to do, who to ask, if you want some information on it, just some general information on any of those bylaws. So in King, it's very hard to push information out. A lot of the information there is though if you want to come and get it. So it's all there for you, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. So as I mentioned, some of them have been on the books for a long time. And some of them, frankly, we hardly ever have to look at. Because, you know, the truth is, lots of people just do the right thing, they use their common sense, and they do the right thing. Some of them we really hardly ever have to look at, but there are a few that, and I'll give you some stats at the end, that we have to spend a little more time on. So what we have started to do in the last 5 years or so, 4.5 years, since I've been with the township, and I'm not saying it didn't happen before, but now we're doing it more purposefully, is we're trying to make sure that we review every single regulatory bylaw that we have every 5 years. Because we want to make sure it's still relevant, and we want to make sure that we're still acting within the legislative authority that we have, and sometimes we want to update the penalties that are in it because the legislation changes, or who's responsible for administering it or enforcing it. So we're now trying every 5 years to make sure we look at every single regulatory bylaw at least once. So what have we been doing? What's the state of our current bylaws? In recent years, as Greg mentioned, we've reviewed and updated our discharge firearms bylaw, the sign bylaw, the doggy daycare and kennel licensing bylaw, and our fences bylaw. The work plan for 2016 includes a review of our special events bylaw, animal control, and parks loitering. And we have an outstanding direction from council to consider how best to manage nuisance issues like dust. And if resources permit, and here's the little teaser I had for you earlier, we're looking at the feasibility of introducing a clean yards bylaw, which, when we're not having to fight with the process that's in for property standards, it's maybe a little more direct. It may be a little easier for us to enforce it. We may be able to come up with something that will be another tool in our tool chest to help our community continue to look as good as it does most days of the week. So stay tuned for that. And of course, if something comes up that we don't have a regulatory bylaw for, or that we find our regulatory bylaw is missing something, at council's direction, we will of course accelerate the review of that bylaw and bring it back. So, what does the review process look like? How do we go about doing all of that? Well, it looks something like this. As I mentioned, staff reviews the legislative authority to make sure we actually have the power to do what we want to do. Frankly, you know, one of the things I love about the municipal world, we're not shy to share and steal from other municipalities. If somebody's already done a really good job, bring it over. We all take a turn picking something that we can do that might help another municipality and other municipalities. So we take a look. We look at what other people are doing, what their challenges are, what their opportunities are, what the best practices might be. And that's an important part of renewing and refreshing our existing bylaws. And we might prepare a draft document. It might be a replacement bylaw, it might be amendments to it. And we usually prepare a report for council to say, okay, here's what we're thinking about. How does it feel to you? Please tell us to take this out to the community and do some more consultation. And that's usually what happens. And then off we go. Sometimes we consulted with stakeholders, more often than not, we consult with the stakeholders that are directly impacted by the bylaw before, as part of our research gathering, but then we formally consult. And if you check the King Weekly Sentinel and you look at the notices page, we will tell you that we're reviewing a bylaw, and we will ask you for your input, and we will tell you where to find a draft, and we'll give you the name of somebody to call if you have any questions. That's a very, very important part of our process of renewal and refreshing our bylaws. Then we take all of that back together, and we then bring a report back to council with a specific recommendation, either to leave it alone, to amend it, or replace it. And with that second report usually comes the bylaw. It's actually been enacted, if it's necessary, by council. So that in general terms is the kind of the process that we use when we're renewing and refreshing our bylaws. And frankly, when we get that new thing that we've maybe never regulated before, would follow a very similar process. But you have to be paying attention as a community. You got to check. You got to, and I know CCKT does. I mean, your executive is monitoring our agendas all of the time and is paying close attention on your behalf. But as individual members of the community, I encourage you to follow the council agendas and to check the township's page. And our website's getting better, and we actually will run banners on our website as well if you check it periodically to say what we're up to. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say we're perfect. There's always room to get better. We're certainly better than we were before, and we're going to keep trying to get better. And if you have any other ideas to share with me on how we can push that information out to you on a timely basis, I'm all ears. Recognizing that we do have issues with cell phone reception and other problems in the municipality. Something, though, that we're also doing that I'm really proud of, and I am really proud of this, is an idea that was proposed to me by Catherine Moyle. And you know her as Catherine Smythe. She got married. Her name is Moyle now. So if you hear Catherine Moyle, that's our clerk. She changed her name recently. So Catherine, who is the director of Bylaws as well as our clerk, and a very capable and experienced person, had an idea on the environmental side. And her idea was, do you think, and this is where I think King Township is showing some leadership. This is our turn to share with other people. She asked me what did I think about her convening what she's calling an environmental consultation team. That is comprised of representatives of Ministry of Natural Resources, perhaps the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, the two conservation authorities that have jurisdiction in King Township, as well as other municipalities surrounding us who may be interested, to actually talk about those of our bylaws that actually have an environmental component to it. Fill and grading is one of them. Altering the grades, we all know, is a large environmental issue. And I looked at her and said, get going, girl. This is a really good idea. And she has just had she sent out the invitation, she's had the first group of folks in, just to see if there was any interest. And I'm really happy to tell you there has been some interest expressed. And the idea, in part, I've got to go back to my notes and make sure I say this properly. We want to talk about matters of common concern to determine their interest in developing model bylaws and enforcement protocols with the goal of clarifying our respective roles and responsibilities, because honestly, sometimes it's not up to King. We don't have the jurisdiction. Sometimes it's the Conservation Authority. Sometimes it's the Minister of Natural Resources. Sometimes it's the Ministry of the Environment. But you guys, you look to us first. So we think it's important that we have a better understanding of what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and what resources they have, and look for opportunities to generally improve the service to our community. And so they had, that first meeting was very, very successful. Interest was expressed, and they're going to tackle as a first project a review of this, the grading and site alteration issues. So that, and it's going to take time, folks. So again, some of these agencies work slowly. They've got to work this into our everyday work plan. But we think this has some real momentum, and I'm really proud to say that King has taken the initiative, and I'm particularly proud of Catherine for bringing the idea forward and being willing to champion it and make sure that it keeps going. So if it works, enforcement will be much more effective and more consistent. So I'm going to switch gears now. That's a little bit on where we are with where our bylaws are and what our plans are for renewing and refreshing them and the kind of process we go through. So I thought you might be interested a little bit about enforcement, and I said I'd talk about that. Are we good? Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So what tools and resources do we actually have to enforce them? Well, as you all know, every bylaw has every person who contravenes this provision of this bylaw is guilty of an offense, and on conviction is liable to a fine of up to $50,000 now. There's a piece of legislation called the Provincial Offenses Act, which actually says what the fines can be. It tells the justices of the peace who hear if we go into court and we prosecute, tells them what their ranges is and what their range for fines is and what their authority is. So the actual enforcement through the courts is actually governed by a piece of legislation called the Provincial Offenses Act. But you'll see that. So they're designed to be punitive. That's when you pass a bylaw, there's a penalty if you don't comply. But is that going to solve the problem? Punishing somebody for contravening the bylaw might not get you to compliance, which is what we want. We want people to do what the bylaws say. So in King, and in fact it's very common elsewhere too, I can say that. In King, our preferred approach is to work with the quotation marks, the offender, the person who may be in violation of a bylaw. Sometimes they know they are, sometimes they don't. They have to be told. To get to compliance. And we do that by meeting with them, consulting with them, educating with them, and so on. Prosecution, with the exception of parking tickets, which is, of course, it's strictly you pay the fine and hope that you've learned your lesson and don't do it again. Some people make the same mistake more than once and think that the fine is really just a permit to do it. I can do it, all I'm going to have to do is be willing to write a check. So prosecution is really our last stop. And we really only go to the extent of prosecution when all of our efforts to get to compliance have failed, or the violation is so serious that we need to send that message very strongly and clearly. Oh, bless your heart, thank you. Okay, so that is our enforcement philosophy. That's the tool that we use the most, is try to get people to comply. Sometimes it happens quickly. Often it doesn't. Sometimes they're actually not in violation, but we have to do an investigation to find that out. So, and I also want to say to you, formal prosecution through the courts is a very time-consuming process. Often we don't get into court for the trial for a year after the offense has happened. Now, that's not solving any problems, really, in my opinion. That's just giving somebody permission to keep doing what they're doing for a whole year until we get to court. And I got to tell you, and again, this is based on years of experience, by the time we get to court, and that, of course, by the way, takes a lot of staff resources, because we've got to attend at court every single time it goes up, and then somebody asks for an adjournment, and they get it, and it goes on and on and on. And everybody has to prepare every time to go into court, it's really not a productive use of our time unless it's a really an urgent situation. So we try not to do that. We try to get compliance. Frankly, I'd rather see people, if they're having to spend the money getting into compliance with our bylaws instead of fighting us in court. That's my personal view on it. And as I said before, for some, the financial penalty is considered just a cost of doing business. It's just not. And the courts are not really supportive. Somebody goes in and says, I can't afford to pay. Okay. You're convicted. Big deal. I mean, I'm being frank with you. So I'm convicted. I didn't keep my yard clean. So the other tool and resource we have in terms of helping us with enforcement, of course, is our staff. And at the moment, we have 3 full-time staff devoted to bylaw enforcement activities who are supported by a deputy clerk who actually comes from a bylaw enforcement background. And through the summer months, May to August, we also employ an additional officer on a contract basis. And just so you know, in 2016, the net operating budget, so that's net of revenues for sign permits and the little bit of parking fine revenue we get, was just over $400,000. So if you want to know what we're investing as a community in bylaw enforcement right now, it's $400,000. And you know what? In the context of our budget, that's not small. That's just a little under 2% of a tax increase. We're spending that every year with these resources. And as we reported to council last year when we were doing a report on our servicing levels, and this is about a year ago we did this work, our staffing levels are actually comparable to municipalities of a comparable size, and that's by bylaw officers per population. Now, I know in King we have a lot of geography to cover, but we are comparable. Some of the municipalities we compare with are also large municipalities that have a rural component to them. So, and then the next step is, well, when we're dealing with the bylaw, now we've got enforcement officers, we've got the tools being compliance and education. So how then do we go about responding to violations of our bylaws? And we do it on a complaint basis. We don't actively go out and look for violations. And this comes back to what I said earlier about, trying to balance the competing interests that people have between using and enjoying their properties reasonably and making sure we have a community that we can all be neighborly in and that we can be proud of. And the truth is, one size does not always fit all. And there are circumstances that can vary from one location to another. But most of our bylaws have to be written in a way, because if they're not certain, and if they're not certain, they can't be enforced. They're written very black and white. Our zoning bylaw is your front yard has got to be 3 meters, whatever the case may be. We have your sign can only be so big. Your fence can only be so high. You can only have so many fences. I see a question back there, but can we wait until the end?
Okay, I just didn't want to get off topic. Okay.
Oh, thank you. I didn't want you to think I didn't see it. So circumstantially, our bylaws are really fundamentally based on common sense. And so yes, we work on a complaint basis. Now, that's not to say if our bylaw officers are out, or anybody, our roads crews are out, if our parks crews are out, and they see something that's really egregious and that really has a public health and safety concern, of course they're going to bring it back to us into the office and let the bylaw officers know, you guys maybe want to take a look. But our formal process is it's complaint driven. And yes, the mayor and members of council can initiate the complaints, and they do. Just want you to know. In some communities, the elected officials don't. As a practice, they don't bring complaints forward. They ask the resident or the individual who brought the concern to their attention to formally lodge the complaint. Now, we do keep complainants anonymous. Now, that's not to say that the person being complained about can't put 2 and 2 together sometimes, but we don't disclose. I just want to make that also very clear. Actually, we have that in the note. We do not disclose who the complainant is. We like it better when they tell us who they are, so that we can loop back to them if they want to be looped back to. You know, anonymous complaints, unless it's on the phone and we can really evaluate that it's a legitimate complaint. But we, as I said, we won't let we don't disclose who the complainants are. And not to the person being complained about or to anyone else. So, what do? All reports of potential violations are investigated by our officers when they're received, and they involve going out and having a look, documenting what they see, meeting with interested or impacted parties. Obviously, they have to create the records. They attend on-site meetings. They coordinate with other departments or agencies because they may have some input into, you know, is the zoning bylaw being contravened? Got to go talk to the planning department. Do we have an issue with site alteration? We better go talk to the engineering department. So there's all of those discussions that have to take place. Sometimes if we're educating the alleged offender, honestly, sometimes people don't realize that they have done something they're not supposed to do. And in that situation, you'd want to be treated with respect. Gee, I didn't know. What do I have to do to fix it? And we explain. We spend the time with them to explain what needs to happen and why, and hopefully get them to agree, okay, I'll take care of that in a reasonable period of time. Where it's appropriate, we'll develop a compliance plan. We'll work with the offender, and they say, okay, it's going to take me 3 months to do this because I have to do A, B, C, D. Okay, as long as we see progress, we will accept that timeline because we want to get to compliance. And again, we have to use common sense and good judgment when we do that. And sometimes there's no reason for it to take a long time, but other times, if it's a significant expense to them, and they have to line up contractors or they have to line people up to do the work, we have to be reasonable and allow them the time to do that. And when it gets to the point where none of that's working, obviously we issue notices of violation and orders to comply. And sometimes we do them even when we're working with the offender. I hate using that word, but it's easier. Even when, just in order to make sure we're protecting our position should something go sideways and they don't actually live up to what they promised to do, and we do need to get into court. So that's what we do. Now, of course, on the other side of that, that's an enforcement tool. You know, on the other side of that, maybe we need to spend more time getting ahead of the need to actually enforce a bylaw through better public education. And we are looking at ways that we can try and do that. Again, we don't have immense resources, but we recently hired a communications person, so maybe we've got a little more expertise in-house now, and a little more resources, maybe some of our efforts to push information out, to provide opportunities to educate the community on some of these things will be more effective. So we're trying to improve our education to the public. The website is our primary method at the moment to do that. Articles in the paper, the township page, those are our primary tools right now. And that's what we're trying to do. And of course, when we do the public consultation, as we review the bylaws, that's another opportunity to be educating the public on what it is that we're talking about and why it's important, and finding out what the community in general wants to see happen. Not one end of the spectrum on this end, you know, one extreme over here, or the do nothing extreme over here. So we're looking to find that common ground that actually is a fair reflection of the community. And of course, council gets to approve all of these bylaws. They are the final arbiter of what makes sense in the context of King. Now, I know that there are people in this room who think we aren't doing our job.
Expect me.
Well, you know, I beg to differ, but I know that people think that. And that you think there's a lack of enforcement. And I'm here to tell you, I want to assure you, that every complaint we get is actively investigated. Our officers are now much more visible than they were before, and I think part of the reason people thought we weren't doing our job is because they didn't see our bylaw officers in the community. So we put them in uniforms, and we have them in marked cars. And I've had residents tell me that they noticed these cars are out on the road. And that is a tool that we can use to let people know that we're actually doing our job, but it also tells the community people are keeping their eye on us. Even though I mentioned earlier we're doing it on a complaint basis, But the fact that we're out there and we're more visible, I think is a positive encouragement to the community to be mindful of complying with some of these bylaws. And at the moment, most of our enforcement activities take place between 8:30 and 4:30 during the week, normal business hours. And we are looking at making some changes to how we schedule our staff so that they can be more available in the community when they're needed. Now that said, at peak times in the year, for peak, in the summertime when we're monitoring the activities of construction, some of them starting too early, we're monitoring that, or in the winter when we want to remind everybody, don't park on the street so that our plows can get through. Not this winter, not a good example, but it is important that we make sure that the streets are clear so that the plows can get through. We do schedule on a sporadic basis, on an as-needed basis, our bylaw officers to be out proactively enforcing parking and monitoring the activities of our contractors. And so, again, through recent amendments that we negotiated in the last round with our collective bargaining, our union contract, we have now got the ability to, as we bring people on, to schedule them for work days other than 8:30 to 4:30 Monday to Friday, which I think again will improve our visibility in the community and hopefully help deal with the perception that we're not doing our job. Because what I'm about to tell you now, I'm going to give you some statistics that I think actually demonstrate that we are trying very hard to do our job. Sometimes people complain about things, legitimate complaint, they have a question, and we investigate and we find out that the person has actually gotten the permit that they needed. And it's really not an offense. And as I said, sometimes we need to take the time to get the people to comply, and sometimes we take them to court, and usually when we do, they thumb their noses at us anyway. So, and that's difficult. And it's difficult to get a judge to order to say it's going to be contempt of court now if you don't do what you're supposed to do. It's very frustrating for bylaw officers, I can tell you. And the truth is, our bylaw officers, they're not usually, when they're going up to approach somebody, they're not usually greeted with a smile. But and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. So just to show you that we're working, council recently, actually at February 22nd meeting, got a report, the statistical report from our bylaws department on what they've been up to for the last year. And you can see that report through the council agendas on the website, February 22nd. I've got a copy of it here with me tonight. But in 2015, our officers conducted 760 investigations. And 25% of those actually related to the upkeep and condition of private property. We're also experiencing an increased number of people wondering about whether there have been zoning violations. They represent about 11% of the complaints that we receive. Vehicle complaints represented about 15%. That's people parking where they shouldn't, or in driveways and way over the sidewalk, that kind of thing. And site alteration, or those grading, about 11% of those investigations were related to those activities. Others are more related to signs and fences and that kind of thing, and that information is in the report. I just didn't want to give you a long list of numbers. So when you think we've got 3 people doing the work, and some of them resolved very quickly, I don't want to mislead you, but we did follow up on 760 complaints that were made last year. So to kind of wrap this up, how am I doing? Okay, I'm okay. We are always trying to make things better, and I'm sure I'm going to hear from you later on ways that we can, and I'll very much look forward to hearing what you have to say to me, and I'm sure council will be all ears as well. But in addition to what I've just mentioned, the uniforms and the vehicles were a 215 initiative. This year, it's just been launched for people who get parking tickets to make it easier for them to pay and to save our officers from having to go to court. We're introducing something called a first attendance facility. This is where you can come into the office and you can explain, I was only 15 minutes past. I didn't realize I was parked in a handicapped spot, whatever the situation is, and we'll be able to deal with it in the office. We're also looking at how we can use technology better for record keeping and to create efficiencies. And one of the things that our IT manager talked to me about yesterday is enabling our bylaw officers from their vehicles to access records in the that are in the office, so that when they're out there doing their investigation, they can find out what it is, what the conditions are supposed to be. So they can they'll be able to access the zoning bylaw, they'll be able to access some information about ownership or something from their vehicle using technology, which will make them much more efficient because they won't have to come back to do that kind of research, and they can maybe deal with things more immediately in the moment. So, we're hoping to introduce very shortly, this is a small thing, but every little thing helps, the opportunity for people, if they want to get their dog licenses, to pay for them online. Maybe encourage more people to get their dog licenses. So just to wrap it up, our bylaw officers have an important job to do, and it's a difficult job to do. As I said, somebody gave me this expression years ago. With some jobs, there is what they call the stress of negative image. Nobody is really happy to see them roll up, unless you're the person complaining, because you've noticed something that shouldn't be happening, and you can actually see them showing up, and obviously they're there following up on what it is you might have called in about. But they do it, and they try to do it with a smile. Their focus is compliance, education, and working with people to resolve problems. And I'm sure that if you found yourself, knowingly or unknowingly, on the wrong side of a bylaw complaint, that you would want to be treated with that kind of respect. So I hope the next time you see one of our bylaw officers out, you say hi and thank you, because they deserve it. I hope that while we're far from perfect, that you can see that we are trying really hard to make sure we remain relevant, that we're very aware of what the community wants to see in terms of what it looks and feels like, that neighbors are respectful of one another, that we sometimes find ourselves in the middle of what's actually a neighbor dispute. There's really, the issue is not really that big in the scheme of things. They just don't like each other, and they want us to come and fix it. I can't tell you how often that happens. Not the best use of your taxpayers' dollars, but it happens, and it happens a lot. So these folks have a tough job to do, and they need your support and encouragement as they do it. And with that, I look forward to doing things better in the future. I look forward, I think, to your questions, and I'll back to you.
Great, thank you. Fantastic. Well, that was great, Susan. Thank you very much.
Were you bored after you turned
No, really. We can tell you. But we're interested. I mean, I consider there are audiences that wouldn't really care too much. I mean, if the Hockey Association was here for Schaumburg, I don't think
No. Never asked for it.
no, they'd be throwing stuff at me for sure.
You want to know when the next arena's being built?
There you go. Oh, let's not. But what I did want to do with the rest of our time, now it's 8:05, we generally go to 9. We wanted to have a question and answer session for Susan. Now we look like a pretty tame crowd here, but I just wanted everybody to know that, you may have an issue that is very contentious that relates to you. It may be that Susan can't deal with it. It may be that it's something that we may have to refer you to your counselor or to a bylaw officer or to a department. If that's the case, Susan or I will tell you that. But counselors, feel free to jump in. This is a great time to get some profile. Not that we're getting any already. So I think we can be pretty casual about it. If you happen to have a question, just put up your arm, your hand. If I will try to remember. I'm not seeing any. No, just kidding. I'll remember who you are. So if I can't get you right away, I will come back to you. Okay. And did you want to come up again and just sort of stand?
I'll stand, sure.
We can make it pretty casual.
I just gave myself
The lady in the back. I'll get you next. Lady in the back.
Yes, I was wondering, there's a lot of illegal tree cutting in other municipalities in your region, and I'm wondering what mechanism King Township has to deal with that sort of thing, and is it a big issue here?
We do not have, right now, the tree protection that comes in King is from the region of York's overarching bylaw that deals with woodlots and forests, and there's a geographic size associated with it. We do not have a bylaw that's down to the individual tree. you know, on a house in the villages, for example. You don't have that kind of regulation yet. But honestly, it's not that big an issue in terms of, we don't hear people call it. What we sometimes see, now with new development, just so you understand, when new development, the new subdivisions, and even some of the new commercial entities, one of the things we understand that in some cases for that development to occur, trees are going to come down. But as part of the approval process, we require them to provide us with a complete tree inventory. We require them to identify what I'll call specimen trees, things like butternut. We try very hard to make sure that they design their plan to protect the specimen tree. And we always require a replanting, so basically far more in terms of numbers than they may take down. Where possible, certainly through the environmental areas that may be flowing, may form part of the area that's being redeveloped, there are significant buffer strips that are protected. And we also have a policy that says, don't think going out in the middle of the night and cutting the trees down, which is what some of them do, it's going to benefit you in the end, because we're going to come back and get you, and you're going to have to do replanting and replacing exponentially more than you took down. So those are our policies right now that deals with new development or development, commercial development, as well as subdivisions, and the overarching, the woodlots and so on. That's how we're dealing with it. It's very, very difficult to get to consensus on a tree bylaw that's down to the individual tree. I was just following what was happening a couple of weeks ago in Aurora. They're amending their tree bylaw because the administration have to put into place to enforce it, and often they're asking, it's too late. They've already taken the tree out. So wouldn't we be better to educate the public? Yeah, wouldn't we be, well, it's gone. You can't replace what they took down. Exactly.
With notice, okay?
I beg your pardon?
They could pay a penalty for that.
Yeah.
$10,000 would teach all those guys, okay? But you don't have the fees there.
Down to the individual tree, we do not. And there are the administrative process that would be required to issue permits to review whether the tree is healthy or not healthy, whether it's a danger or not a danger. It can, I'm telling you the truth. Some of you are going to say it's an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's a reality. And lots of people say, I am an environmental steward. This tree is dying or dead. I am not. But you're going to make me pay you a fee so that you can tell me how to wind my watch, that tree is not in good shape. People resist that. Very hard to get a practical, enforceable bylaw that's down to an individual tree. So we would rather spend some time educating people on the importance of their trees and maintaining the canopy. If they're coming in for a pool permit, do you really need to put it there? Is the tree going to be at? We at least ask those questions. But we do not have a tool right now that says you're not allowed to do that. Down to the individual tree on somebody's lot in their subdivision.
Very interesting.
Well, I'm sorry, just a follow-up. Do you know, Susan, if the province is considering legislation at the individual versus?
I do not believe that they are. I don't know that they are. They would leave that. That is such a loaded issue.
No, I'm just curious.
That's exactly right.
And I think we have them in some municipalities.
Well, but the thing is, if Susan is saying basically the municipalities are creatures of the province, if she's saying
Well, we have the authority to pass a bylaw.
Oh, sorry, at the local level.
Yeah, the
No,
local.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
misunderstood
no,
you.
we have the
So
authority.
you're saying it's an enforcement issue?
It's an administrative and an enforcement
Oh,
issue.
sorry, I
Yeah.
did the other way.
So I'm glad I got a chance to clarify that.
If we were to pass one, it would end up being an enforcement issue for us.
Oh, hugely.
Huge enforcement issue.
Yeah.
But the other thing that we ran into when we were looking at a tree bylaw is that a lot of people who said they wanted one became concerned when they realized that now we would be regulating their property. So what I learned from that whole process is that a lot of people don't like seeing trees coming down on new development. They see developers and they see a new development going in and they think all the trees are going to come down. And the reality is that the whole approval process allows for trees to come down if the Conservation Authority or the Region of York in their their woodlot bylaws allow for it.
I
So-
think that's important. Your region has a good forestry
Yeah.
It
department,
does.
and that's where you should address your problems if you have one, because they'll deal with the big ones, right?
So
And
a
they
single
do.
tree
They're
bylaw
effective.
would basically deal with all of our property. It's not the development property that it would deal with. It would be dealing with your home, and if you want to cut a tree down on your property. And what I started hearing from so many people is, I got enough regulations, don't tell me what I should be doing on my property. If I want to cut a tree down, I'm going to cut a tree down.
Well, your region took care of a case a
Yeah.
while ago on the 16th side road, where this guy was going to do whatever he wanted.
So they're kind of-
They were in there and they kept their eyes. Like there are, with the big issues, I think they're really good. But for people deciding to take down, I guess if you have like houses side by side, everybody wants to take down their trees. Yeah, I
Well,
can see that.
some people,
Who do you go to then?
believe it or not, it's the neighbors sometimes. I actually, when I was, years ago, I call them the neighbor disputes from hell. I hope you don't mind me speaking that, frankly, when it really is. So there's a beautiful tree on my property over here. It overhangs over here, and the leaves fall. And I don't like cleaning up leaves. So I'll call the municipality and say, make them cut that tree down. That limb is in very good shape, and I'm worried it's gonna fall over on me. I promise you that happens.
That happened with me, Sue. I had a resident call me and ask if I could get their neighbor's tree cut down
Yeah.
because it was dropping branches into their garden.
But that said,
Tell them to mulch the leaves.
that
Great.
said, in terms of dealing with, down to the individual tree on, I'm not talking about development land, I'm not talking, but people's own properties, in King, people are generally really respectful of the trees they have on their property. They want to take care of the trees on their property. If it actually interferes, and maybe they want to put an addition on, or they want to go up and it's going to impact the tree, they really think about it. They don't just take it down because it's a nuisance. There's a reason usually, and usually they'll compensate by putting all kinds of other landscaping or green into their properties. Honestly, in my experience in King, I have had very few that come to my attention, where someone's called to say, my neighbor's cutting down the tree, come and stop them. Most people in King, do we really need to overregulate for something that the vast majority of the community is already very respectful of?
Sorry, we're gonna, this lady right here, you're right.
Hi, Carol. Hi, I'm Carol Lula, I live in Sonoma. And I just want to say that I sat on the Property Standards Committee as part of the Committee of Adjustment for 6 years. And I can tell you the worst disputes we ever got for both committees were all about neighbors who hated each other. It's when you're petty stuff, it's unbelievable.
I know.
Totally, both sides totally crazy.
Yep.
Anyways, I have two issues I just wanted to raise. One was you were talking about the possibility of a clean yard bylaw.
Yes.
And as one of the people, I'm sure many of you are, who go out every spring and clean the garbage in the ditches, or we clean the 17th side road, and I mean, we literally can get 30, 40 bags of garbage. I mean, it's terrible.
Tim Hortons.
Well, I mean, it's everything. I mean, it's construction garbage, tires, I mean, we have couches, we don't know kinds of stuff. And I said this when I complained recently about construction garbage, and the township people were there 2 hours and cleaned it up, like it was amazing. But I was just wondering if the clean yard bylaw would be something like, we always say, why is it that people who own these properties, and some of them are rural and farms, why are they not asked to clean it up? Because clearly as taxpayers, we cannot afford to be cleaning, and that's why volunteers do it, but we can't afford to be paying staff to clean up every ditch in King Township. And yet it always, like this weather right now, it looks horrible.
Yeah.
There's no grass. Eventually the grass grows up and covers a load of garbage, but, when you clean it up, like, there's a huge amount, and it is people driving to and throwing things out in it, so
Yep.
So that's one question is it possible to have something? And again, it's not a matter of just requiring, but requesting and educating people, saying, please clean up the property you have that's on the public road. Right, and if everyone did their little bit of property, it would make the township look so much better.
I agree with you. There is a spring cleanup day that's coming. And one of the things was actually the very point about clean up the ditch in front of your house, that's where you are.
Every week. Yeah, once a year.
You know, there's a lot of people, you know, they're busy and they say, well, that's not my property, it's somebody else's problem. Well, in the villages, we ask people to keep the grass cut right up to the sidewalks, even though that's not their property either, and they're interested in doing it. But at the Sustainability Committee, last meeting, one of the questions was, how are we going to engage the rural areas in the clean up King Day? And that's one of the initiatives.
And maybe if you have a bylaw, it would be like you're required to, but then you educate people, please, this is like shoveling your sidewalks. I mean, that's county owns a sidewalk, but you're required to shovel it, right?
Yeah, and the truth is, when it comes to the sidewalk, again, just so you know, we can pass that bylaw, but we can't depend on people to do it. We still have an obligation to make sure, a legal obligation, a risk management issue, to make sure that sidewalk is cleared off in a reasonable period of time. But when we're talking about building community and building, a prideful community, a community that's proud, you know, we should be taking account responsibility for that little piece of the territory that happens to be in front of our property as being a good citizen. You're right, Carol. I don't think we should be asking the taxpayer. But it costs. Now, we can't ask everyday people to clean up 47 pallets that some guy illegally dumped from another municipality in the dead of night. And as a township, our staff will go out and clean that up. But the coffee cups and the wrappers, and I think it's reasonable to ask the community to do that, and maybe we should embark on it.
And I just have one other question. You know, when we get our tax bills, I don't know if they still do it, but the last few years they sent out this noxious weed list. And I was just wondering if that's something you can also look at, because we talked about this environmental impact committee, and there are things on that noxious weed list, and I know it's for the purpose of not contaminating agricultural land, but things like milkweed, which people want to plant for butterflies. So I think that the thinking has changed around the environment. So maybe some of the things that we used to think were noxious weeds for agricultural purposes, actually people now buy seeds and put in their gardens. So maybe we can review that at some point.
I'll take that back. You mentioned the noxious weeds are actually determined by the province. We don't decide what they are. Some of them are. Yep.
Got to thinking about trees, and I was just reflecting on, I've been in Nobleton a long time. I call myself, where I live, Old Town. And so, you know, like 20 years ago, there was a new extension put onto my street. And they planted ash trees. Well, nobody realized there was going to be emerald ash borer, you know. And so now all those trees are dead. So township is now cleaned up all one side and has got around to the other side, but I'm sure they'll do it sometime. So I'm not complaining that they're getting rid of these dead trees, but I'm thinking when we require the subdivisions to put in trees, perhaps we should say they must be all different or quite a variety of them, rather than have them all the same so that if some little bud comes along.
I hear you. Should we not learn from Dutch elm?
Yeah, exactly. So we never know what it's going to be next, you know, but let's have a variety so if all the whatever trees get hit, it won't wreck the whole scene for that street.
Yeah, we do already have a policy that requires trees to be native, so that should help a little bit. But of course, some of these pests are coming from
Who knows where, right?
Walt, and then over here. Walt, you have a question? Or Kurt, sorry.
Yeah, okay. My questions are about grading and filling.
You got one question, and then we'll come
Only
back
one?
if we have
Only one? I have two actually.
well, if we get to the end, and
Yeah, I'll make it very short, okay? The only thing, 3 years ago, somebody in my neighborhood filled, on the mooring, okay? He brought in 15 to 20,000 tons of fill. There was nothing to be done. I called everybody, no activity was done. Totally paper side. Second thing is, on 16455 Clear Street, there was a 7-meter wide road built through the farmland, and your department didn't know anything. I called, hey, Bylaw, how can I do it? Nobody did anything about it. They didn't have a faintest idea. And that's a million of stuff, okay?
Well, we do need residents to call and alert us because.
I did it everybody.
Okay. Well, I can't answer specifically to because I can tell you, and I said it earlier. Every complaint that comes in, we do an investigation on. So maybe if they did what they needed to do, and eventually, I don't know the answer in your particular case, but there is a process for getting a permit to do that work.
15,000 to 20,000 tons of fill on the moraine.
Kurt, was that the one that's north of you on
Yeah,
the
go
west
back,
side?
yeah.
So that was an approved site plan. That was
It's
approved.
nevertheless, it's a moraine
It was approved on, the Moraine permitted it.
by everybody, yes.
So it was legal.
Okay, next we have, no, you will be next, sorry.
No, that's okay. There's been something that happened across the street from us that I've been curious about ever since it happened. We live in an area with larger lots and 3 houses that are adjacent to each other. Beautiful, flowing land down to the stream. And there are no fences or anything. Gorgeous at the back. So one guy moved in, and I should have done something about it as soon as I saw these trucks coming. I assumed, he was doing something small. Truck after truck of huge blocks of armor stone went in. By the time I finally saw what he was doing, I spoke to the neighbor. It was a 16-foot wall of armor stone that had gone up at the top, and he had excavated this beautifully undulating ground and made it flat, so you could have a flat patio with this huge wall. Water comes down, it changed the water course, it ruined all the trees that his neighbor had put in, and the neighbor was too shy to say anything, he didn't want to complain. Took all those trees out, it really altered the level. So finally, Western was saying, does this guy really have a permit for this? And he didn't. So the township said, stop work. He got the environmental folks in, they got everybody else out of it. But the bottom line is, the wall was still there. And so why could somebody put up this monstrosity and then be allowed to keep it, even though it's continuing to damage the neighbor's property? What process would he have gone through? Would there have been a fine, do you think, and then he gets
Probably
to keep the wall?
Probably not. We probably would, I don't know, exactly in this particular case. But as I mentioned, we try to work to compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So if we would probably, I won't talk about that specifically.
Yeah, do not,
Yes, because
and I don't want to identify.
no, so in that situation where somebody is basically, they didn't bother to ask for permission, they're now asking for forgiveness.
Yeah.
What we would do is put them through the process that had they asked for permission first, we would have put them through. And if it was approvable at the end of that process, they would be permitted. So that something that would have been approved had they asked, and gone through our requirements, they would be able to keep it. But they will have gone to an expense to do the studies and the work and so on.
Seems strange that in this case that it would ever have been approvable. A 16-foot wall that your next door neighbor, they used to look out in a nice lawn. Now they've got this. Yes, they have.
But not until after the wall was
TRCA got very involved, and because it was in the floodplain, it wasn't an enforced bylaw enforcement issue. TRCA enforcement became involved. So I can't comment on how it resolved.
Beyond that,
Yeah.
But that's where this initiative, thank you for that, Councilor Schaefer.
And what I would, as Catherine said, I was not called until somebody finally called. This has been going, like reluctant to report
Right.
and.
Trying to be a good neighbor.
Yeah, so it went on.
Give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
The RCA, I think, has more authority within their regulated area than we do.
Absolutely.
They have police officers that can confiscate.
But you have to know that a lot of people don't realize, well, this is LSR.
No, but you call, so
No, but
okay,
if you
you
call
call
us-
the enforcement immediately recognized and said TRCA, and they got involved.
Susan, do a pitch for the new King Map.
Oh, sure.
That's right, because the king actually,
Yeah, so there's now a new application on the website that's our King Maps, and you can look to see if your property is regulated and who regulates it. So just getting back to what Councilor Schaefer was saying, that would have been a regulated property, which sends up a lot of red flags right away.
I'm wondering, as you were saying about getting out ahead on all the bylaws, I think of an example. So new person comes in, looks at their property, I thought they would have to file a site, right? But it's in a, you know, it's in an environmental sensitive area, and comes in with all its stones and builds up a big place. Actually, the water's gonna run down and flood his house, waste of time. But anyway, you know, you go visit and they're nice and say, I don't think that culvert will be approved that he put in himself. No offense, like probably twice as high as it's allowed. I mean, bylaw enforcement has now been visiting. But the thing is, a few of us as good neighbors were talking to him well before this thing happened. And I know bylaw enforcement has spoken to him, but he still feels in his heart of hearts that he says, nobody tells me what to do on the property.
That's right.
And I thought, now you're really into a situation, because when I look at that cement block, massive fence, I don't know how can you get to even reduce it? Like, I mean.
And that, again, just so I can just build on this, because Councilor Shaver just made something, a very important observation when it came to the authority of the TRCA or the Lakes and Coast Region Conservation Authority or the Ministry of Natural Resources. Where it is within their jurisdiction, we have none.
Sure.
So just so you understand that. So
but
where,
like this culvert, by the way, and I think King Township, sorry to say to him, that one's going. But you know, the thing is, neighbors have already said this, and so how do you actually get it through their heads? I mean, there has to be a document that they get before they start their building. I know this is your site plan. Don't try anything cute.
no, but if they, in some cases, it's not something that would actually trigger the need for a formal site plan. You know, if somebody wants to put, I'm not talking about what you're sure in this example, but if somebody wants to put a deck on the back of their house, and it's not more than 100, I still speak Imperial, it's not more than 100 square feet, they don't need a permit.
Sure.
So there are a lot of things that people do that they actually don't need permits for.
That's understood.
There are a lot of things that a lot of people do that they need a permit for, but they honestly don't know. For example, I'll give you an example. This is my own personal example. I'm a resident of King, have been since 1981, St. House. My son got married 2 years ago, and he wanted to be married in the backyard. Lovely. His father and I were just very flattered. We rented a one of those great big honky tents. I had no idea that I actually needed a building permit. I don't think a building permit. It was that big. I needed a building permit. Because of the size of the tent. All I'm saying, not to make excuses, but there are a lot of things people do they honestly don't know. And then there are a lot of things people do, and they say, I probably need to do something, but I'm going to ask for forgiveness, not permission. And so that's why when we get to enforcement, we do end up, did somebody really not know? I mean, fortunately, I rented the tent from a very reputable company, and they had put great big concrete things down so it wouldn't fly away in the wind. But I had no idea, and I've been working in municipal government for 30 years.
But Sue, here's another example though. So you're talking about someone who may have made a mistake and didn't realize they were making a mistake. But it's possible that someone could buy a piece of property that's on the moraine that might require site plan control, and they could just start shipping lumber in there, and they could start shipping people in there, and they could start putting up a house without a building permit, doing all kinds of grading, and it's not like we have King Township police that can go and stop them.
Right.
We have to go through that whole process that you're talking about to stop them and take it to the courts, to the point, and then there's even a chance that maybe they can get in through a compliance.
Yeah.
If the house has been built properly and it can be proven that it's been built properly, but these are the extremes. And so you're talking about the behavior of people. There's a lot of people who think, I should do the right thing and go and get a permit. And then there are others who just think, I don't
Nobody
know.
tells me what to do with my property.
Right. There are those people who think, I'm just going to do it. And watch them. And watch them spin, chase their tails, and watch people get upset while they just do whatever they want.
I think it's a good point that being there and get into court, well, I have taken it over to court, but
Or not.
We'll see if we want to do another, right there.
Thank you. My question pertains to someone who's requested a bylaw adjustment or permission to do something, and it's rejected. Is there any follow-up to ensure that they have followed the rejection?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to think if they know that they need, Sometimes, again, in some of those situations, they come and ask for permission after the fact, because they didn't realize they needed it, and they go through the process, and it gets approved, it gets approved. You're talking about the situation where they've applied for something, it's not approved,
That's right.
and then they go do it anyway? Well, I would hope that we don't proactively follow it up. I mean, that's probably fair to say. We would not go out and double check that they didn't. Probably because, I mean, I think a reasonable person would say if I knew I needed permission and I went to try and get it and then I didn't get it, I'm not gonna do it.
These are reasonable people who do what they want to do anyway, right? So
if that happened, you should report that.
well, it was done. I discovered it after it was all done, and then
that's
what
it.
happened. For example, you know the recent change to the bylaw in King City, where you have a certain size lot and your driveway, you can have 3 garages, but your driveway can only be 2-car wide.
Yeah, and in
Recently
certain
changed or
communities,
documented.
different subdivisions have different rules
Right,
for that.
right.
So it's not uniform throughout King City.
So they requested it and it was rejected, and they did it anyways, and by the time I looked up the street, I went, oh my God.
If that happened,
It did happen.
okay, so accept that. So given that happened, you should let us know, because especially when it comes to things like the
But
driveway,
after it's happened, what's the
we
recourse?
make them restore it.
You make
Well,
them take out the asphalt?
Yeah.
But if they cut the curb, it's one thing to go on.
No, these are ditches. We won't talk
Okay.
about the street.
But it's one thing to cut the curb or to do something
Right.
in ditches and also on private property.
Right.
But the municipal right of way is owned by the township,
Okay.
which they won't do. Yes. Well, here's the other thing about municipal bylaw enforcement. So, over the course of 30 years or more, you might find that many people have slowly
Right. I know.
contravened the bylaw.
Right, and I get that, but I'm talking about the new people that are coming into the community, who've done the right thing and asked for permission, didn't like the answer. What is the township doing about their drive about? I mean, here they have a short list of people who made a request, was rejected. Usually it's done, I would think, within the month.
I'm not sure I'm following
I
you.
guess what
You're
she's asking
talking
is what, if it's refused, is the township doing anything proactive?
No, we're not.
The same
Oh,
line,
no, I
think
get
why
that
not?
because nothing happened, but what I'm saying is, with regards to new homes, new people that are coming in, it's one thing about new subdivisions, we're talking about existing subdivisions. I don't know how big of a list you could possibly have for these bylaw requests. You're smiling, so.
No, we process them, because there's an actual.
Right.
One of our bylaws, you need to get permission to cut the curb, if you're gonna
But
do
there is
that.
no curbs.
No, so they
Right.
had come in and asked for permission and it was denied. We wouldn't do a follow-up, but if you knew that and you called us, we would expect them to restore the property so that it did conform.
Well, this is where technology has to come and play. You've got new hires, you've got summer students, whatever, a driveway. You have a short list. I
Yeah.
requested
You've got
to
to come
expand, whatever. The community is not large.
No, but
Then what you gotta do it immediately.
Well, that's what I said, it's usually within the month.
yeah, that,
Where do you start?
if I'm gonna sound like I'm making excuses, but I'm gonna be very frank with you.
Okay.
Driveways is one thing.
Well, I'm sure
Now
there's
it's the
lots.
fence, okay? Now it's the sign, now it's the this.
Yeah.
We truly don't have the resources to go back and
Okay, so
double
if I
check.
call,
If you
I
call,
will call tomorrow,
you do that.
and this
we
happened
will-
last summer.
And-
Okay.
And one of the things with the heat maps that the mayor mentioned a few minutes ago is we now actually have readily accessible to us a pictorial record, like from the satellite photos, going back to the 70s. So if that person were to try and say to us, for example, oh no, that's been there for a very long time,
Yeah.
we can now, looking at this satellite imagery, thank God for technology, say, no, look, it was not there. Plus you came in and asked and you were told no, so don't give us that. It hasn't been there. We expect you to restore the property.
So, do you have to go through the court thing, or how does that?
No, well, we might have to eventually,
Eventually.
if they didn't do it voluntarily.
Okay, but we don't have to wait for that, we can act.
We can always ask. Our expectation would be that they would take steps to restore the property. That's what our expectation would be.
Can I just ask everybody in the room this question? So, if we're thinking we should have proactive bylaw enforcement, then we should have our bylaw officers actively, all around the township.
We don't have to be hired.
Yes, well, is everyone in this room positive that they're in compliance with all bylaws in the township?
Of course. Now, if I can on that point, even if we did, we aren't going to be able to enter onto somebody's private property and check out their backyard. We have no right, if it's someone's home, we have no right to enter their home. We have to be given permission. So even if we tried to do that, we would not be able to get at and see. Some of these, they're often big properties, it's happening way at the back, you know, see here, speak no evil. We can't get back there.
Do you know what a
We do not
drone
have the
is?
right to do that.
Do you know what a drone is?
Yes, I
They make a collection of my drones?
I think we're pleased that a draft bylaw is out for the town of Nobleton and that you're using it as a template for Schaumburg and King City. I'm wondering if you thought at all of putting in place an interim holding bylaw, simply because people are going to get wind of what's happening, and rather than waiting for that to happen, they want to get in ahead of that.
You know the challenge with doing that? And
Well, I know other municipalities do it.
well, they may do it in very specific areas, but to do something community-wide, we did consider that. I actually had that question put to us, so just so you know. It actually impacts everybody from even doing the smallest things to do it. So somebody who wants to put a small addition on their house would not be able to do it. Again, it's an administrative issue. And you know, some of these things that are happening, I know that the whole issue of redevelopment in existing neighborhoods and, you know, ranch bungalows and split levels are becoming great big two-story houses in some areas. I know it's an issue. We here at council has made it very clear to staff that this is an issue. And we did think about the zoning bylaw, but it captures everything. And the truth is, it's going to take, by the time we go through the mandatory processes in the Planning Act to do the zoning bylaw, potentially deal with appeals to the OMB on parts of it, it'll be, before it's actually fully enforced, in some cases it's going to be a long time. And in the meantime, nobody can do anything.
Sue,
Even the reasonable things.
how many interim control bylaws can you have in effect? One. And do we
Only
have-
one?
Per municipality?
Only at one time can you have. So, an interim control bylaw can be brought into place for a specific issue. If you discover another issue, you can't do it because you already have one in place. So the next question is, do we have one in place right now?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure.
We had one,
I know.
acre plan.
Yes, and I believe that bylaw expired, but we did do the study we were required to do, but that bylaw did expire. They're time limited too.
Sure.
Our frustration is with the appearance of businesses
Uh-huh.
in residential areas. Very rural on the 17th side road zone, rural general. We know that businesses can appear if they're household kinds of things,
Home occupation.
home occupation.
Yeah.
But we have now 3 businesses that have appeared on our road in the last 10 years. 2 of them are on either side of me. And the bylaw fellow has come several times, been very fine, I've had a good conversation with you. But in one of the cases, he says it's out of his hands, he can do nothing about it at all. It's been taken higher up, whatever that means. The other one, he has spoken with the people and taken their word for that it's simply a storage place for some of their equipment, which I don't think is even allowed, but it isn't, it's more than that, it's a landscaping business. And the other woman on the other side, when he can't do anything, has a road servicing business with all her big trucks and storage of huge oil drums. We're just stuck. We're frustrated about this. We don't know what to do.
I'm in the same boat. I've got, except that the one on one side of me, I'm on 10 acres on the 18. I've got doggy daycare next door to me on one side, and I've got what is a master clean service, heavy industrial cleaning business on the other. It started out as a home occupation use, and has more, he doesn't even live there anymore, but the business is still partially operated over there. I know the frustration having to do provided some documentation that's difficult to refute to say, well, if there had been similar activity on that property since before there was a zoning bylaw. So they are challenging, those issues are very challenging because we do permit home occupation uses in rural areas. And it becomes a matter of degree. And so I'm happy to hear that the bylaw officer did follow up, and I'm happy to hear that he stayed in touch with you to explain what's going on. Those home occupation type uses can be very, very, very challenging to try and prove in a way that will allow us to enforce it.
But when there's heavy equipment, it seems to me it's obvious that that's not allowed, so then why is
And
it?
some rural areas, if they're active farming, you will see heavy equipment, that's related to the farming activity.
It's not farming, this is not farming, these are trucks.
So, I'll take back, we'll try and brainstorm even some more on what we can do in that situation, because those are very, 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 I'm not gonna lie to you, they're very challenging situations to get the evidence that we need to prove that the use is not something that's permitted within the bylaw. I am hoping when we get to the rural area bylaw, we will be much clearer on what, our bylaw as it applies in the rural areas. Sorry to tell you, it's 1974. It needs to be modernized and updated to give us better tools to deal with those issues.
The other question from the township's perspective is what kind of taxes are these people paying that have these businesses going on?
That's something we are actively looking at. It's catch-22, right? Oh, we don't want them to be there, so we don't want them to say, well, you're collecting taxes that I'm allowed to be here, so it's catch-22, right? So we have to be really clear when we do our rural area bylaw, which will be in a concept. To be honest with you, it's going to take. We've got to get Nobleton and King City and Schaumburg looked after. We're years away from doing a thorough review of the rural area, but we do need to tighten that up to deal with those kinds of concerns. Be more clear about what a home occupation use is in the definitions, and fortunately now using technology. When people start those arguments, well, it's been here in one form or another for long enough, we're going to be able to have better evidence to support the fact that no, it wasn't. And that's, the change was made here and we can see it. But it is a big challenge.
A couple quick questions. You mentioned that the official plans have been reviewed now by Planning Act every 10 years. Just quickly, when is the King City official plan will be finished? The review?
This year.
You'll finish this year?
Yeah.
Well,
it'll be out for discussion, like the actual document. When it's finally adopted, the schedule is going to come to, as I said earlier, there's a report coming from the planning department, and I haven't seen it yet. That's coming to the council next meeting. So we're planning the schedule for all of those things.
At the same time, obviously, applications are still coming in for zoning bylaw changes, amendments, etc. I guess these are being considered individually according to the old official plan. And as a result, if there's any applications or any changes considered, I believe the neighbors or residents who are impacted by those changes need to be informed.
Yep.
How far from the development do you need before you get informed?
I don't want to go from memory, but there is, in the Planning Act, there is a minimum radius from the property of people who are required to be notified. The other way we're allowed to give notice is through just an ad on the township page, and that's considered acceptable notice. So you need to watch the township page for those kinds of things.
Township page needs to be readable. I've complained before, and it's sometimes a bit better, but why can't you talk to the editor and say, we want it to be the same type as the rest of the newspaper? It's terrible.
Well, in fairness to the newspaper, that's us. We are responsible for how that copy looks on that page.
Well, then guess whoever's working on it to realize that it needs to be the same size type as the rest of the paper. I can't even see it.
Can't figure out where the map is.
One there, and then I've got. Oh my goodness. We're working on it. So Bruce, you have a question?
Just a quick one. Well, that's a quick one. It's a big one in a sense, but and I probably know the answer. I mean, it's got to do with planning. It's got to do with the redevelopment and so on. And And I want to say this respectfully for our current council and so on, but it's got to do with redevelopment of lots. And we're working on this 1974 zoning bylaws, and we don't have septic systems anymore. And of course, we're all aware that the big problem is that suddenly you've got a little 1,000 square foot bungalow and decided you've got a 6,000 square foot house that's 40 plus feet high. And, I guess my concern is, I mean, he's been very clear that the process of reviewing and revising the zoning bylaw is going to be a long one. Here we are, I guess, 2007 sewers went into my street. And I'm just feeling like the township is so way behind the ball on this one. And I mean, I recognize, please recognize that back in 2007. We can't go back in time, and I recognize that. Is there some, I hear it's been so complicated, is there some form of interim bylaw that can sort of be put in place, because these houses, like there's a new one started, I'd say once a month in my southeast quadrant as it is. I mean, by the time we get a new zoning bylaw, I might as well say, forget the little bungalows, I might as well join and I'll build a 6,000 square foot home, But, yeah, I guess the question is there any way to sort of implement a reasonable interim bylaw? I mean, I recognize, I'm not trying to holding bylaw, but, and I know that typically it will be, well, what parameters do you put around things? But anyway, I'll throw it out there just because the community, the neighborhoods are being transformed so quickly.
And that's why council asked us to accelerate and gave us the resources through the budget process to move the King City situation through. And, the learning that we did through the development of, where we got to on Knowlton will actually, hopefully, shorten that time frame up so that the risk window is going to get smaller and smaller. And that's the other reason why, staff is bringing that report to council with the work plan and the schedule, so that we are accountable to the community through council for what we're saying we're going to do and when we're going to do it. And if we don't, I expect that I'll hear about it.
Property tax by the square foot?
Well, I gotta take this man away. You have a question, sir?
Yeah. Just back to the theme of site alteration, more and more we're seeing these trucks that have been going through King Township with fill now entering into some properties on King Township to get rid of that fill. We have one just down the road from us where they put a stop work order on it and been investigating, and I don't know where it'll end up. But where it used to be that a lot of the filling was done in valleys or for building lots, driveways, now there's big blanket fills in farmland on very, very fertile topsoil. It doesn't matter whether you put it in the fill in a foot deep or 4 feet deep, the topsoil's going forever. My question is, the township actually ever on a large scale made somebody remove fill? The most egregious example I can think of is across from BTN on the east side of Highway 27. About 3 years ago, they put a huge house in, and they did one of these big blanket fills. And when I talked to the bylaw officer, he said, oh, well, they're leveling the field to make it easier to farm. Well, it was already level, and they were putting shale on top of topsoil, and my answer would be, well, then make them farm it. But all they did was they just rearranged the fill. They pushed them up into a berm on 27. That was it.
I don't know if it's the one I'm thinking of, so I'm going to be careful about what I say. In these very egregious situations, we have been trying to work with the property owner, the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Natural Resources, because they do have some jurisdiction here, to make sure that it would have been approvable had you applied, what is the quality of the material, or, so that it's not contaminated and so on. But as to whether we've actually made people remove extensive amounts, I cannot answer that question.
The answer is yes.
But I don't know if it would be the order he's talking about.
There's instances throughout the township, though, at least 3 or 4 that I can speak to, where we have required the property owner to restore the property to the original condition. There was a situation on the 16th where someone filled in a pond. if they had gone to the township to apply for a permit, and if it was permissible for them to do it, had they gone through the process. Like if it's on the marine, you have to get a natural heritage evaluation by an environmental consultant to say that what you're planning to do is possible under the marine legislation. Then that would be a part of the approval process. So the way that we have done it, I know that our previous director of engineering forced a couple to do it, and that was to basically turn the process on its ear. So they've gone out and done the work, we've stopped them, and then we require them to go get a natural heritage evaluation. We require them to take samples of the soil to make sure that it's not contaminated. We require them to provide all the drawings that would be required under normal circumstances in order to get the permit. And if they go through that whole process, and it's possible for them to get the permit, then they would bring the whole filling operation into compliance with that permit. If it's not, then they're required to remove it. In this circumstance, on the 16th, not only did they fill in a pond, they filled it with garbage. There was rubber tires, there were pieces of asbestos pipe, and this was flowing into the backyard of this person's home. And you wonder why people would do this, because these were beautiful multi-million-dollar homes, and this guy filled in a pond with garbage.
The pressure will increase for landowners to accept a lot of this bill, because it's $60-70 a load.
These fill issues, site alteration issues, this is an issue that CCKT has been closely watching, mostly because we're very aware of the massive fill location just west of Schaumburg on the north side of Highway 9.
$2 million to guy here in 1 year.
It's been a crazy situation out there. It's quite now the federal government has slowly been getting around to recognizing that just because you make people responsible for having a landfill plan doesn't mean that you're interfering in the operation of a federal airport, which is what these guys are getting around. They're saying, well, we're federal, we're legislated federally, we don't have to apply to the municipality for anything. And they've been doing a ton of fill in there. Now, so the thing is, we're a member of an organization called the Ontario Soil Regulation Task Force. So that's a number of other groups like ours that are actually trying to pressure the provincial government and the federal government to legislate. Not so much, well, of course, we have to be concerned with the end use of soil, which could be potentially contaminated, but more dealing with the source. Because right now, to get a site plan or any kind of municipal approval to be able to develop the site, you don't have to state where your soil is going to go or whether it's been tested or what have you. Because if you have contaminated soil, there are legal ways of dealing with that. They're just very expensive. And I will tell you in this room that there's a whole hell of a lot of money in the landfill business, and that's exactly why we have, characters involved in it. They're making a lot of money. And we know that, and that's why one of the reasons why we pay insurance, because we're afraid as an organization of being hit with slap suits from one of these. And in our industry of environmental advocacy, we've been concerned that one large developer or soil group would just take one of us on to make an example of it. So it's a kind of a nasty business out there. But what I wanted to tell you is that there are organizations like ours that are working towards a better model, which says if you're going to be a generator of soil like this, you better have a plan or you're not going to be approved for your building site. So that's really the end goal. I'm not there yet.
That's Ontario's job.
Does that include the Kennedy gas station?
What?
In Kennedy, there's a gas station, was a gas station, right?
Right. Yeah.
And for the last year, they turned it soil this way and this way, that nothing's been excavated. The gas, they took the tanks out, and the fill is still there.
Well, that's
and nothing's been done with it.
I believe that, is that a Ministry of Environment? Ministry of Environment has to give a...
They're pumping from this, so it goes this way and it goes this way, they just turn on the...
There are new technologies now when it comes to gas stations that allow them to remediate on site. I do not know if that's what's happening there, but that property has recently changed hands, and the new owner is aware of the environmental issues and will be required to remediate.
Put a extra, that's good.
We have a question, Lydia here. Gentlemen, one more time.
Susan, I appreciate you have limited staff resources, council has other priorities. Are we leveraging the region of York? Because I have to think the challenges we're having, so you use Nobleton as an example, you're trying to get some efficiencies in terms of the definitions you spoke about. I assume other municipalities are having the same issue. Does the region not have a role to maybe help municipalities like us to maybe do some of that due diligence, so therefore you can do more with less?
Well, when it comes to land use planning, things like zoning bylaws, no. And when it comes to bylaw enforcement, they don't have any bylaw enforcement capacity except in the forestry area. So no. So we use consultants and to help us when we're doing these big projects. And we do look look at what other communities are doing and create those look for best practices and try and make it a made in King type solution. We want to own our zoning bylaw. We want to own our.
Yeah, and I don't mean that we want to give up responsibility or ownership. I guess what I'm saying is, again,
if I'm being really
from a best practice
the region
perspective.
is telling us too much what we want to do. There's a lot of things that they want us to do that if it was up to the community, we probably wouldn't be doing. So it's a natural. They're a partner in a lot of things, and they are very supportive in a lot of things, and they have a lot of jurisdiction on many roads in King Township. But when it comes to that kind of thing, they're not set up to do that.
Thank you. We're going to do two more questions. One from Virginia, and then one from this lady right here. Oh, one from the gentleman. So we're going to do two more quick questions.
Susan, I understand there is a Federation of Ontario Municipalities. Is that is correct?
There's an Association of Municipalities of Ontario called AMO. There's a Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which is national. Called
the Ontario.
AMO, yes.
Has the concept of reform of the parent laws ever been sounded at one of those meetings? It sounds to me as if what we're dealing with partly is just antiquated, obsolete legislation. Well, and it doesn't suit, the penalties are so remote from the municipalities and from the problem itself that, you know, all this frustration is being expressed tonight.
Some of it, as I mentioned, there's something called the Provincial Offenses Act, which sets out the framework for using the courts to enforce our bylaws. And there was a review not that long ago that actually upped the fines, you know, gave the courts more capacity to evaluate what the maximum fine could be. And one of the things we're doing as we review our bylaws is we're making sure that the language in our bylaws says if the penalty for this offense is whatever that legislation says it can be. We had some old ones kicking around that were, this is going way back. I've looked at them anecdotally just for fun because I'm kind of interested in, you know, we've had their bylaws on the records going back to 1800. And the fine would have been, the maximum fine is $300. Well, that was in the day when that was a lot of money. So now we're writing our bylaws so they're more flexible so that we can take advantage of whatever that maximum penalty is.
Canadian, right?
Yeah, Canadian. Yeah. So they do listen in some cases on this whole bill issue, and I think Greg really hit on it really well, is it does need provincial regulation and provincial oversight because they actually license the trucks to move the material, but they don't care what happens in between. You know, if it gets delivered and it's bad, then they'll act. But now the horse is already out of the barn. So there, in terms of that situation, some of our bylaws, this is going to sound like I'm being critical, and I'm really not. It just happens. But you need to be purposeful about your review of these things. You have to make it part of your work plan that you're going to review them at regular intervals, and that's what we're starting to do now. The community, as we all know, is really changing. It's changed dramatically in the last, 10 to 15 years. And so things that nobody ever thought we'd ever need now become necessary, and we're catching up. So I think the answer to part of that is to make sure we're constantly, we're reviewing our regulatory bylaws on a timely basis to make sure, as I said earlier, they're relevant and that they are a reflection of the community that we all want to live and work in. So that's.
I think it's relevant to point out though that in the fall, in the Toronto Star, a Fraser Institute report was in a Toronto Star article that identified King Township as the most heavily regulated municipality in Ontario, I think.
Good.
So we're number one.
We all know that people want to do what they want to do on their own property. But have you ever entertained
real estate companies and real estate agents to educate them into telling prospective homeowners what they're going to be having to look at when they move to King?
Well, I know in one of my former lives, when we were making some big changes, we did invite the real estate community in as a stakeholder. It had to do with apartments and houses, you know, that whole initiative that was old and now it's back again. And to let people know, and some of them came out, but a lot of them don't want to know.
That's what I'm saying, but it might be interesting to educate the real estate people.
And I think when we do the new zoning bylaw, I think that's a really good suggestion, that we make sure we reach out to the local real estate community to let them know.
So that they know.
Yeah.
They probably don't.
When he said they're the most regulated ones, but all bylaws have as much teeth as a paper tiger, you know, we have laws by the ton, but nothing happens, there's no teeth to set everything, you know, especially if you're adjustment committee, I have very good.
There's a lot of real estate agents in King. I want to do it on a proportionate basis. You have a fair share. We're number one in King. We have one more question from the gentleman in the back, and then we're gonna wrap up.
Super quick, just out of those 700 odd ones that you did last year, how many of those end up in court? And does the public have a right to see those?
No, you don't. You have a right to see the statistical report. You cannot see the details because we are required under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Personal Privacy Act to keep all of that. While it's before the court, we would not be discussing it with anybody.
Yeah, makes sense.
But very few actually. Truthfully,
It's like 1%.
not even.
Well, really?
Apart from the parking, and I'm leaving parking tickets out. But very, 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 very few would ever make it into the court system.
You said, well, it's before the court, but after it's been settled, it's public knowledge?
Well, that particular file, but the ones that we're working on to get to compliance and all of that, no.
But even once they're closed, we have no right to.
No. There are privacy issues we have to respect. In the same way that we respect the privacy of the complainant.
Right.
Vis-a-vis the person being complained about. It works both ways.
But don't get up yet. Don't get up yet. Okay, hold on a second. I want to give a really big thanks to Susan Plamondon. Is it green? Is it green?